Hey guys, welcome to Sandy Cats. Today we're going to be talking about slapping 35's on a GX, 34's on a 4Runner. It's pretty similar because the fender opening in a 4Runner is slightly less than a GX, so the effort's about the same. Also the same steering components, suspension parts, and so on. I have the most extreme version of 35's and 34's. They're both 12.5 inches wide with a -30 offset. So it's the most difficult option that you could have to be able to slap these things in there and make them work off-road with no rubbing. This is going to be a two-part video. Part 2 is going to be all the grinding, hitting with a 20-pound sledgehammer, all the trimming, and so on. Part 1, this video is going to be mostly mechanical. Steering components, suspension, tires, wheels, control arms, KDSS. We're going to cover all this because running 35's isn't as easy as putting a hockey puck lift kit in and slapping 35's and going, unless you stay only on the road. If you want to be on the road only, you could probably get away with that. But if you actually want your vehicle to go off-road, to not break down every single time you go off-road, and to perform, there's a lot more that needs to be considered that most people don't discuss when they're showing off their 35's on Instagram or YouTube. So that's what we're going to cover today, is really everything that you need to know, and is it really worth going that route? Because it's not a cheap or easy route to go into. The cutting, grinding stuff, I could tell you this much though. We'll get into, why I want to make it a separate video is because the truth is, on the 4Runner, I spent over 20 hours cutting, grinding, and hammering just to get my 35's to fit perfectly with no rubbing. On the GX, I spent about 15 hours. It was slightly easier actually, but it's still a lot of time. And this is time that usually a shop won't be able to handle for you. And there are a few shops that probably can do 90% of the work, but most shops won't. And the reason why is because you can get close. You can go into slap 35's on, start taking measurements and trying to cut and grind what you think will work, but every combination is different. So to get the last 10 to 20% of grinding, chopping done to make your vehicle work perfect off-road, you have to go test it. Then you have to go back to the shop, have them do a little bit more, test it, go back to the shop and have them do a little bit more. You could probably do it with a shop, but it's a very difficult thing. So it's something that if you go this route, 34's or higher on a GX or 4Runner, you got to be prepared to get at least a little bit dirty yourself. So the weakest link when you put weight here is going to be your steering components. Once you go over a 34, it's something you need to consider. If you're going to be on the pavement and fairly easy off-road overlanding trails, you're fine. But if you start progressing higher and higher, this is going to be an issue for you. And it's three things. The first one is going to be your steering rack. On my green 4Runner 2019, before I had 10,000 miles on the odometer, I went through 2 steering racks. But that's because I drive like an idiot in the sand. I was going, I drive 60, 70 miles an hour in the sand, and I hit a bump, like a bump big enough, you could hear the damage you're causing in that steering rack. Not the end of the world. You could still make it home, most likely with a bad steering rack. Get off trail, make it home, so it's not gonna, kill you. However, it is something to consider. On that specific vehicle, I upgraded to an RCLT kit. And that basically gives me a Land Cruiser 200 steering rack. This is a very expensive way to do it. You're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars. For this vehicle, my wife's white 4Runner, we're staying with stock steering racks. We don't want to throw that money in there because these rigs aren't built to do hardcore trails or go super fast in the desert. These rigs can still do very good trails that are, black trails or whatever you want to call them, just not too fast. And they can still go 40, 45 miles an hour in the desert. And I'm not too concerned about that steering rack, honestly, as long as you drive well. The next thing is going to be your spindles. So your spindles are very weak here. Within the first real off-road trip, overlanding trip this rig took, we were doing fins and things in Moab. Not a difficult trail for this type of rig, honestly. However, within 10 minutes on that trail, I think, we bent the spindle. Thankfully, we didn't break it, but we bent it a little bit. And that's because this is a lot of weight going down a little waterfall and hitting the sand in the, at certain speed, you're going to possibly bend a spindle. Bending a spindle sucks because if you break a spindle, this is going to be a very costly trail repair. And it's a very, very cheap modification to do right now. So both our rigs now have gusseted spindles. We got them from a third-party company. However, you could also take your spindles, send them out, getting gusseted for a couple of $100 and you're done. So that is something I strongly recommend you do, because you don't want to be dealing with this type of issue on the trail. The third thing is going to be your tie rods. The tie rods are weak here. They are very weak. And you can upgrade your tie rods. I personally did not do that on these rigs. The reason why is because if I get really beefy tie rod end links, then I'm going to hit a rock one time really hard, and that pressure has to go somewhere, and it's going to go into my rack, and I'm going to, freaking go through my rack really fast. So I rather have my tie rod bent, because a bent tie rod is a very easy and cheap repair on the trail. I always carry an extra tie rod end link, and it'll match for both of my vehicles. And it's, maybe at most an hour of work, probably much less actually, to replace the tie rod, and I'm good to go on the trail. What I did order was sleeves for the tie rod. The sleeve will allow the tie rod to not bend too much. So it'll still bend, and it'll absorb all the pressure from a strong hit, but it's not going to bend so much that I have to repair the tie rod right there. It's going to bend to a point where I could still most likely drive off the obstacle, get to flat grounds, and then have to deal with repairing the tie rod. So that's, for me, that's what I did. Not worry about the steering rack. Don't drive like an idiot. Gusset your spindles, a couple $100, and I recommend, a tie rod sleeve for like 80 to $100. I think it's pretty cheap as well. And I'm done with my steering components. So the next thing we're going to discuss is tires. Before we go into this, I just want to mention something. The reason why there's no exact blueprint for getting a 35 in a rig is because every tire combination, wheel combination, and lift kit combination is going to sit differently on a vehicle. And therefore, the work required is always going to be slightly different on a vehicle. However, I'm going to give you a general blueprint. So the first thing with tires is every manufacturer, a 35-inch Cooper may be slightly taller or shorter than a 35-inch, Nitto or BFG. But if you go on the website, it'll tell you the exact height of a 35-inch tire on there for their brand. I think this Cooper, even though it says 35 inches, 315, 70, 17, I think it's about 34.6, 34.7 inches, and it says that on their website somewhere in a PDF. The next thing I'll tell you is width, narrow and wider. I'm not going to go into deep discussions on benefits, pros and cons of this. There's a lot of good videos on it. What I can say is that the wider the tire is in generally, it'll perform better off-road. Not in all cases, but in general. The more narrow a tire is, the better it's going to perform on road as far as miles per gallon is concerned. It's going to perform much better in in ice and rain conditions, wet conditions. Wider tire usually floats better on snow though. However, so there's a lot of pluses and minuses, right? The only thing to understand for the purpose of this video is the wider your tire is, the much more difficult it is to shove in there. I went the widest generally acceptable, which is 12.5 inches. If you're going to go for a 10.5 or 11-inch wide tire, you're probably going to save between 4 to 6 hours of grinding, cutting, trimming, and so on, honestly. The last thing I'll mention is the weight. I am super conscious on weight. This Cooper, I think, if I remember correctly, is like at least 5-10 pounds lighter than a Nitto. And I specifically went with this Cooper because it's the tire that I know that performs very well, but it's still light. The heavier you go, the more you're abusing those steering components. Okay, and the next thing is going to be your wheels. Really, with wheels, it's, a lot of people choose wheels based on looks. One thing to discuss in wheels is your offset. The more negative offset you go, the wider you push your wheel and tire combination away from your axle. And there's pros and cons, a lot of cons. The more negative you go, the worse your turning radius is going to be. Dirt Lifestyle, Nate did an excellent video on that. I'll link it below. And because you start pushing your vehicle out, you're going to put a little more stress on those steering components. The benefit of pushing it out, A, it gives you a wider stance, but B, most importantly for me, is if you want to get gusseted spindles, chances are you're going to have to push it out by about 1 inch. So I went -30 offset here, which is about like 1.2 inches. I pushed them out, and that's, I think, almost the maximum offset you can go. You can also go with like a stock offset, 0 offset, and put wheel spacers on. Not going to get into if wheel spacers are good or bad, but I'd run them all day long. And you'll still get the same stance as I do. Meaning that if you decide to gusset your spindles in the future, you could still get away with 0 offset wheels as long as you put spacers on later. Why did I specifically choose this wheel combination wheel is because it's a beadlock. I can have a whole, 10-hour conversation on beadlocks, but I'm obsessed with beadlocks. I will only run beadlocks for any type of overlanding or off-roading, honestly. And this is the lightest weight beadlock I could have found at the time when I was buying these beadlocks. So between this beadlock and tire combination, I just looked it up. I'm saving myself 15 pounds from running a, what most people run, which is like a Nitto tire and a different wheel combination. So I'm pretty happy with my combination because of the weight. Okay, next I want to talk about suspensions. I'm not going to go into every type of suspension. I run Elkas here. I'm very happy with them for certain reasons. My wife's 4Runner, I ran Kings, and the second I got these Elkas, I love them so much I got rid of the Kings for Elkas. But for some people, Elkas are going to suck, to be honest with you. It really depends on the type of off-roading you do. So don't go on Facebook and say, what's the best suspension? Go on Facebook and say, this is the type of off-roading I want to do. This is, the weight that I run on my rig when I'm off-road. This is the speed that I go, and then you can make a decision, because every suspension is tuned differently for a different style of driving and different weight of vehicle. That's my rant. The higher you go up in your suspension with any type of lift kit, the easier it is to put 35's on. But the more you're going to affect your articulation. So therefore, there has to be a balance. I'm not going to go into the details. All I can say is there's a great video that I'm going to link below by Tinker's Adventure, who goes into very technical information as to, where that balance point is. The first option you have is going to be a body lift. A body lift is something that lifts your body up and doesn't affect any of your mechanical stuff, including your suspension. That's going to be your easiest way to lift your body up by 3 or 4 inches and shove 35's in there. Lift your body up by 6 inches and shove them in with no other work required. I don't even know if they make 6-inch body lifts for these rigs. However, the reason why nobody does that is because if you lift your body up, A, you still keep your height from the ground to your mechanical components the same, so you're not really gaining any height advantage there. B, you're going to have a gap. And you're going to put side rails on, you're going to put bumpers on, and you're going to have a humongous gap, and it's going to look ugly. I've never ran a body lift. I know people that will slap a 1-inch body lift just to get that extra height, and it works in certain scenarios. It just doesn't work for me. And the next option you have is like a hockey puck lift, which is going to be these stacks that you put on top of your shocks that'll lift your body up, basically give you like the same stock suspension ride, kind of. And the best company that I've worked with that makes those is like Cornfed suspension. I wouldn't recommend going 3 inches on a hockey puck lift. Your stock suspension can't really handle that, but you can use it for an extra 1/2 inch or 1 inch. I personally use them all the time. Every single rig of mine has it, because once you lift your rig up by 2, 3, 4 inches, and once you put on a lot of weight, your rig may not sit level. And you may need like a 1/2 inch hockey puck or a 1/4 inch hockey puck to be able to level the rig out. And then of course the third option is a regular suspension. So that's what, if you're going to go 35's, that's really what I recommend to get your ride to be comfortable for those 35's, or as comfortable as possible for those 35's. A regular suspension is going to involve replacing your front coilovers and your rear shocks and your rear coils. I will say that for your rear coils, make sure that you have approximately your final weight, because I personally, my wife's 4Runner, for example, went through four different coils. I'm on the 4th one right now to get the perfect ride, because each coil is meant for a different type of weight, and that's something to consider as well, right? Once you finally get the right parameters down, if you still don't have enough height, or you want an extra 1/2 inch of height to make sure you're clearing everything, then you put the hockey puck in, like a 1/4 inch hockey puck or 1/2 inch hockey puck, and you're good to go. In the front, on both rigs, I'm sitting at about, the way I measure it is from the ground to the slip. Here I sit about 39.5. Right now I'm not on level ground, so it looks not as good, but here, from here to here, when I'm on fully level ground with no weight in there, I'm at about 40.25. And I try to keep the back about 0.75 taller than the front. The reason why is because when I load the back up, when I go off-roading overlanding with a lot of weight, it settles down and it's usually rides around level based on the coils that I have. So the suspension is not difficult. Pick one and then you're gonna have to modify it a little bit. You can't go to a shop and just say, I want to stop the suspension and then think you're gonna be happy with it, because you start adding weight, you're gonna have to start changing coils out, whatever. For these rigs, when I built my wife's rig out and the GX out, I intentionally built everything that I could on it before, including the skid plates, all the bumpers, everything, before I put the lift kit on. Or I tried to, at least. I was still waiting for the rear bumpers, but everything I put, because I wanted to make sure that I'm on my final weight before I start getting the suspension on and having to switch coils out and getting the ride perfect. Before I start testing the ride quality out, I want to make sure I'm on my final weight. So that's something to, consider as well. So the next thing is going to be your control arms. I only went with the front upper control arm here. I did not go with the lower, because I'm trying to keep these rigs cost effective. Lower is going to start getting very expensive. With an upper, I went with an SPC, only because, to my knowledge, it's like the most adjustable control arm you can get. And I want as much adjustability as humanly possible, because I want to be able to position my tire as much forward as I can while keeping really good alignment specs, so I have less rubbing and less beating up over here that I need to do, to be honest with you. For the rear, I needed to replace both my upper and lower control arms. Is that mandatory? No, you can get away with keeping them stock. I found that if I want to be basically in up travel, a millimeter away from the slip, I am rubbing over here. So I needed to move the axle back a little bit so I don't rub here and get maximum up travel. If you want to limit your up travel by about half an inch from the slip to an inch from the slip, you can get away with stock control arms. So that's something up to you. I want to get maximum up travel out of the rigs. I want to get maximum performance out of the suspension in the situation that it's sitting in. So therefore, I had to move this whole axle back. I believe in the GX by about 0.35 of an inch, and on the 4Runner by almost half an inch. And that's because even though it's on 34's, it got closer to this door than on the GX. The way the axle sits and the body trim is a little different. So you can, at least I did, on a 35 and this GX, I was able to, using those control arms, I was able to perfectly align my rear axle. So I was right up on the slip, I wasn't touching here, and I wasn't touching my stock rear bumper. I had to get rid of the mud flaps though. Now that I got an aftermarket rear bumper, it's not even an issue. Can you get away with just lower control arms? Probably, but I want to maintain the same drive shaft angle that's factory, and therefore I want upper and lower. You're also going to want to get a Panhard bar relocation kit, which is basically a bracket. You get a bolt-on version now. Dr.KDSS sells it for under like 200 bucks, I think. It's very fast to put on from what I could tell. I had to weld it on because he didn't sell it before. So what it does is it'll relocate your Panhard bar / track bar, whatever you want to call it, back to factory position after a lift kit. That's going to be very important for trimming purposes, because it'll let your axle on both sides go up and down correctly. Short version. So $200 or something like that. Get it. It's definitely necessary. Okay, the next thing we should be discussing is if you have KDSS. You lift your rig up, your KDSS is not going to be happy. You need to get it back to fairly factory settings, positioning. Blackgate Customs sells these drop-down brackets. They'll drop your KDSS by about, I think, like 1.5 inches or 2 inches. And that'll get you almost back to factory location in essence. However, be careful, because sometimes it won't work with every type of skid combination. So do some research on that, depending on the skid you had. The next thing would be is Dr.KDSS sells these brackets that will save your bushings, because even with the Blackgate Custom setup, your bushings are still going to be out of whack for your KDSS. So you're going to have to get the Dr.KDSS brackets as well, both sets. Between those two sets, you're going to be happy. Your KDSS system should be happy. KDSS lean, is it true? I don't know if it's true, because I had the same lean on my non-KDSS 4Runner, but we fixed all those leans using those hockey pucks by Cornfed suspension. Another thing is gearing. Your rig is going to be slow. This rig is on 35's, is not re-geared, pretty heavy. The white 2021 4Runner is on 34's, about the same weight, modifications, and re-geared with 4, 5, 6 gears. 0 to 60 drag race type of thing between these two rigs. I'm gonna guess they're gonna be exactly the same speed. If this was re-geared, then it'd be faster. But right now they're about the same speed, but I'm okay with that. And the other thing I'll say is major component, to be honest with you, that people don't discuss is overheating transmission. You're going to go to 35's and you're possibly going to add skid plates, some weight. You are gonna start overheating your transmission. You might not know it because the ding doesn't go on. Talk to Toyota about that, but it's going to happen. So with the 4Runner on 34's skid plates, one auxiliary tranny cooler was enough. With the GX, 35 skid plates weight, it is what it is. 3 coolers and a fan is what I needed to get it back to decent tranny temps. So that's another thing you're gonna have to do, and you're gonna have to start monitoring. Once you go on big tires on these rigs, please, I'm begging you, get a Scangauge or some kind of transmission temperature monitoring tool and monitor your tranny temps, especially when you're off-roading uphill. So one thing I forgot to mention in this video is cam tabs. After our first trimming day on the GX, we took it out and did a couple of minor jumps with it just to see where we have rubbing, and we broke the factory cam tabs and had to install aftermarket ones. That was not a cheap operation, and it's something that we did now on the 4Runner as well, just in case. So that's another thing to consider. And the other thing I want to mention is I didn't go into bump stops because I'm going to go into that deeply in part 2. However, that is another minor addition you have to do. Okay guys, so that's pretty much it for my mechanical rant. This isn't a lot, to be honest with you. I know I make it sound like a lot. But as far as steering components for me, Spindle gussets, a couple of $100. You could ship out your spindles, get them gusseted back to you for a couple of $100. Sleeve under $100, and I'm good with my steering. Suspension, you can go super expensive like I did with Elka. You go cheap, you could probably get away with a $1,500, $2,000 suspension that's gonna ride great. So it really depends on you and your budget. Maybe some hockey pucks to level things out, another $100 or $200. Upper control arms, you definitely need $600 or so, right? Plus an alignment, a couple of $100. Again, if you can't afford the rear control arms for now, fine. Limit your up travel a little bit with some bump stops, which we'll discuss in video 2. That's pretty much it. You're gonna need some aftermarket bump stops, you know, $200, maybe $300, I don't remember. Panhard relocation bar, I think about $200. I know it all kind of adds up, but it's not that much, to be honest with you, for what you're doing with your rig. Your most expensive, like single purchase, probably gonna be your tire and rim combination, right? You can do this. It's not that hard. This is a weekend project. Everything I'd say, including a transmission cooler, please get that. But everything here, except for gusseting your spindles, unless you're really good at welding, is a weekend project that you can go with fairly basic tools and you know, minimal knowledge, just some good YouTube videos. It's not that difficult. All the difficult work is really going to be in the grinding, hammering, beating things up. And you know, the next video is not only going to be me doing that, it's going to be me doing the install as well. So you'll have a pretty decent blueprint of everything you need to do this work yourself. Or at least now you have the knowledge of what your possible limitations are with your rig if you have it done in a shop, right? So again, don't go on the forums and Facebook posts and say, please tell me what tires to get, what rims to get, what suspension to get. Because there's a lot of what ifs. And unless you're posting everything about your situation, you're gonna get bad advice. You will, because everybody's situation is different. A guy could slap 35's on, be a pavement princess, and tell you, hey, all you need is a lift kit and never anything else, because he just doesn't know any better. And then some guy's gonna put 35's on and slap them on and go on the Rubicon Trail because some website says the Rubicon Trail, all you need is 35's. And that guy's not getting out of the Rubicon Trail because he doesn't know how to change out his tie rods even. So there's a lot of what ifs. That's why I made this video. I made this video to try to address all the mechanical parameters regarding this before you take the plunge into 35's. Thank you for watching this. Sorry that it was a little bit of a rant. Next week's video will be, you know, more of me doing stuff in the garage, so hopefully a little bit more entertainment. Thank you.